1997, a revolutionary aircraft took to the skies above Russia, and its wings were the wrong way around. Now, forward-swept wing design wasn't something new, but this might have been the first time that it actually worked. Today we're going to explore the story, the hardship, and the engineer's vision behind the jet of tomorrow, the Su-47 Berkut. During the 80s, the Soviet Navy had big dreams to conquer the seas, defend the vast Russian coast, and to rival the American Navy power. But to do that, they needed a new state-of-the-art jet. Sukhoi developed a new aircraft named the S-22 and actually dubbed it the Su-27KM to confuse the West. It would be Russia's fifth-generation air dominance fighter for the Navy to accompany the Yak-141, a lighter VTOL-capable aircraft. Up until recently, not much was known about the project, but there was actually a mock-up made at the time, including a very interesting flat exhaust nozzle design choice. But then a change had come for the USSR before Sukhoi could build a prototype, and there were no more fat paychecks to spend on crazy projects. However, Sukhoi Bureau started seeing potential and saved this design and thought that it could be their opportunity to finally beat their rival MiG and reserve their spot in the 5th gen race. But ironically, the tale as old as time doesn't actually start with Russia. The story behind the S-47 and the forward-swept wing design leads back, like nearly all aerospace projects, to the Third Reich. In 1944, the Nazis built a new jet bomber which could outrun enemy fighters at the time, hoping to somehow change the tide of war. It was called the Junkers U-287. The main issue was the amount of stress that was put on the wings, both in terms of bending and twisting during flight. Without composite materials that we have today, the project was doomed from the start, and other advantages of this wing design, like reduced drag and increased maximum speed, couldn't be utilized. But the Allies, including the Russians, took notice, and once an idea is created, it's hard to shake. The Russians had been working on a design like this for a very long time, longer than you might think, since World War II with the DBLK, but finally there was a solution available. Around the same time of the Grumman experimental aircraft in the late 80s, the Soviets started two very ambitious programs called the MFI and the LFI. Their task was to create a new multi-role fighter and a light fighter to counter the US's ATF and future JTF programs. The famous MiG Bureau won the contract to create a multi-role fighter prototype, which then turned out as the MiG-144. But Sukhoi had an ace up their sleeve and a vision to follow, and they were not going to give up that contract that easy. They said, if you won't fund the forward-swept wing jet, we'll do it ourselves. The leadership of the Sukhoi Bureau decided that they would fund their project internally and beat MiG at its own game, letting the more superior jet aircraft do the talking. Now, this would be a huge gamble on the future of the company, not seen in aviation since Boeing gambled with the creation of the 707, and like Americans, they would build a full prototype first. The aircraft was redesignated as the S-37, and they got to work. By 1997, it was ready to take to the skies. So now let's talk about the most futuristic and most powerful jet the Russians might have ever created. And boy, the engineers went crazy with this aircraft. Like the X-29, the flaw of the forward wings were solved with the use of carbon fiber and composite materials. The wings of the Su-47 were around 90% made out of composite materials and allowed the aircraft to have a fighter performance with better fuel consumption because of the lower drag. Large canards were mounted in the front of the wings to help the pilot steer and maneuver the aircraft, and unlike the X-29, the Su-47 was a powerful bird with two Soloviev D-30 F6 engines, providing 93.1 kilonewtons of thrust, each with either 2 or 3D thrust vectoring nozzles. The same engines that were used for the MiG-31. and we know how fast that thing was. This would allow for a max speed of over Mach 2.2 and give the plane the same maneuverability as the Su-35 or F-22, pulling more than 9 Gs without structural damage. Unlike the F-22 or F-35, or even its successor, the Su-57, the one of the Su-47 had a rotating launcher with new R-77 missiles. It would be able to carry additional fuel tanks or go air-to-ground weaponry on a minimum of 2 hardpoints on the wings. It would also have a 30mm cannon that would complement the other weaponry to make it the ultimate air superiority machine. Air ducts were S-shaped to further decrease radar signature, and although we couldn't say that it would be as stealthy as the Raptor, for sure it would have had a slightly decreased RCS compared to 4th gen aircraft. The two tail booms bring up the rear of the aircraft that housed ECM equipment because it couldn't be located on the tips of the wings as traditionally on modern flankers. Some parts, like the landing gear, was actually borrowed from the Su-27 family to cut down production costs, because remember, they were paying for this themselves. But it featured a glass cockpit and steering controls were on the sides, like with the Su-37, which is actually quite uncommon for the Russian aircraft. So in 1997, with this incredible machine built, the Golden Eagle performed its first flight. If it was so superior, why didn't the Russians use it? By 2002, over 150 test flights had been carried out to complete various tasks and gather other data, and by this time all the effort that the Bureau had put into the project had finally paid off. The government decided to further push the development of the Su-35 based on the Su-37's experiences and make it Russia's new 4++ Gen Air Superiority Fighter, as they were working on a new stealth aircraft to enter service, and there were also some budget cuts prolonged by the development of the PACFA over many years. The Berkut actually flew for a couple more years, being a testbed for many different technologies, avionics, radars, EW systems, etc. And by the time the Sukhoi finally got the funding and green light from the government for the PACFA program, the design was already outdated and obsolete, and they needed to base their new 5th gen fighter around something more familiar and future-proof. This led to the Su-57 with a more traditional stealth design inspired by the YF-23 and F-22 Raptor, but it was the Su-47 that made it possible for this aircraft to enter serial production and become the first Russian operational stealth fighter in history. In 2009, the legendary Su-47 was finally displayed to the public again, now being a legacy and a testament to the willpower of the engineers and test pilots working for Sukhoi during the 90s and pushing through all the hardships to beat MiG and write the modern history of the Russian Air Force.